You know what? I've been around this town for a long time. I've seen a lot of things, good and bad. Some things that made me proud to be an American, and some things that made me sick to my stomach. But what happened today in the House of Representatives, that was something different. That was something that cut right through all the noise, all the garbage that usually comes out of Washington. And let me tell you something, it gave me hope, real hope. The kind of hope I thought maybe I'd never feel again. Look, I don't usually get involved in this political stuff, you know? I make movies. I tell stories. I try to entertain people, make them think, sometimes make them uncomfortable. But sometimes you see something happening and you gotta speak up. You gotta say something, because if you don't, who will? If guys like me don't stand up and call it like we see it, then who's gonna do it? So here's what went down today, and I want you to understand just how big this is. For months now, we've been watching this administration act like they own the place, like they can just do whatever they want with the stroke of a pen, like the Constitution is just some old piece of paper they can ignore when it gets in their way. The president, he signed this executive order, took away collective bargaining rights from federal workers. Just like that, boom, done. Now let me tell you who these federal workers are, because this isn't about some faceless bureaucrats sitting in fancy offices. These are good people, hardworking people who serve this country every single day. They process your veterans' benefits so our heroes get what they earned. They keep our borders safe from people who want to do us harm. They inspect the food you put on your family's table so your kids don't get sick. They're the ones who show up when there's a natural disaster, when communities are hurting and need help. And this guy, this president, he tells them they don't have a voice anymore. He says they can't negotiate for better working conditions, can't stand up for themselves, can't even have a say in how they do their jobs. You know what that is? That's not leadership. That's not making America great. That's bullying, pure and simple. And I don't like bullies. Never have, never will. I grew up in a neighborhood where bullies thought they could push people around just because they were bigger or louder or meaner. You know what happened to those bullies? Eventually, somebody stood up to them. Eventually, somebody said enough is enough. And when that happened, those bullies, they weren't so tough anymore. But today, something beautiful happened. Something that nobody saw coming, including me. 20 Republicans, 20 of them. They looked at what was going on and they said, no, this is wrong. This isn't who we are. This isn't what America stands for. They joined with the Democrats and they passed something called the Protect America's Workforce Act. 231 votes to 195. And I know what you're thinking. Republicans crossing the line? Working with Democrats? That doesn't happen anymore, right? The parties hate each other too much. They can't even agree on what day it is, let alone something important like workers' rights. Wrong. It happened. And you know why? Because some people still remember what it means to have a conscience. They remember that they took an oath to serve the people, not to serve some guy sitting in an office throwing tantrums when he doesn't get his way. They use something called a discharge petition. Now that sounds like fancy Washington jargon, but it's really simple. It's democracy in action. When the leadership tries to bury something, tries to hide it away in some drawer so nobody can vote on it, well, the members of Congress can force their hand. They can make it happen anyway. It's like the emergency brake on democracy. When the system gets stuck, when the people in charge stop listening, this is how you unstick it. And that's exactly what they did today. Speaker Johnson, he thought he had this locked down tight. He thought he could just sit on this bill, keep it buried, protect the president from having to deal with the reality of what he'd done to working families. But democracy, real democracy, It has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. When that vote counter hit the magic number.
Hello brothers and sisters, welcome back to the channel. I'm hoping that you're doing great from wherever you're watching me from. Brothers and sisters, Mr. Donald Trump promised something that he can never deliver. He could never deliver. He promised people hope. He gave people a second chance to believe that America is becoming great. But I guess it just battered the United States. But as things goes on, there is a turn of event. People who are so close in the orbit of Mr. Donald Trump are starting to see him for who he is. People are starting to turn against him. His inner circle, his special group that's starting to turn against him. These include influential voices. In today's video, we are going to see Robert De Niro, who is going to reject Mr. Donald Trump. This reveals something big because we have 20 Republicans who are at the orbit of Mr. Donald Trump who also left him. And the reason stands one. He promised something that he can never deliver. And so the world is getting to see Mr. Donald Trump for who he is. But at the end of the day, we are going to get deep into it. But first, I want you to watch this video and then I'll be back. I'll be sharing my thoughts in regards to this. I'm your number one host and presenter, Digital Stories. And if you're watching me for the first time, you know how I do it. I'm just asking you to please subscribe to the channel, join the membership. I really get to see what I can offer you. For those who are always coming back, watching my videos, man, I'm really grateful for the support that you're giving me. Now, I'll just watch this video and then I'll be back, right? So let's watch.
When they reached 218, the majority they needed to pass this thing, you could hear a pin drop in that chamber. Then the gasps, the whispers, the realization that something historic was happening right in front of everyone's eyes. This wasn't supposed to happen. The script said it wouldn't happen. All the political experts, all the smart guys who think they know everything, they all said it was impossible. But sometimes people surprise you. Sometimes they remember that they're human beings first and politicians second. 20 Republicans. Let me say their names because they deserve to be remembered, because what they did took real courage. Brian Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania. He led the charge. This guy, he's always tried to find the middle ground, but this was different. This wasn't just a negotiation or some political compromise. This was a rescue mission for working families. Jeff Van Drew, Chris Smith, Tom Kaine Jr. These aren't wild-eyed radicals or troublemakers. These are serious people, experienced legislators who looked at their districts, looked at their neighbors, and decided that protecting working families was more important than protecting their own careers. And you know what happened when they walked across that aisle? When they signed that discharge petition? The hardliners in their own party booed them. They actually booed them. Can you believe that? Here are these representatives doing what they think is right for their constituents, and their own colleagues are booing them like they're at a baseball game. But you know who was cheering? The federal workers, the families who are scared about their future, the people who actually do the work that keeps this country running. They saw a government that was finally working for them instead of against them. Now let me tell you what's really happening behind the scenes. Because the White House, they're panicking. They're not used to losing. They're not used to seeing their own people say no. For months, they've been operating like they have a blank check to do whatever they want. Executive orders flying left and right, bypassing Congress, acting like the other two branches of government don't even exist. And the reaction from the administration? It's been vicious. They're lashing out at everyone, calling people names, throwing around words like traitor, like it's confetti at a wedding. They're calling these 20 representatives enemies of the party. Enemies, because they stood up for workers' rights. You want to know what I think? I think they're scared, really scared, because for the first time in a long time, they realize they don't control everything. They can't just snap their fingers and make things happen. They can't rule by fear anymore. Democracy fought back today, and they don't know how to handle it. The thing is, when you govern by intimidation, you're only as strong as people's fear of you. But if a whole group stands up together, if they realize they have safety in numbers, you can't punish them all without hurting yourself. That's exactly what happened here. These 20 Republicans realized that they represent their constituents, not the White House. They realized that their oath was to the Constitution, not to any one man. And let's talk about what they were fighting for. Because this isn't about abstract politics or Washington games. This is about real people, real families. We're talking about the folks who make sure our veterans get their disability checks on time. The people who keep our national parks open so families can take their kids camping and hiking. The workers who handle logistics of disaster relief when hurricanes hit or wildfires rage. The inspectors who make sure the meat in your grocery store is safe to eat. The President's executive order, it stripped these people of the right to bargain collectively. It basically said, if you have a problem with your working conditions, if you think you're being treated unfairly, too bad, deal with it. It was an attempt to turn public servants into at-will employees who could be fired for any reason or no reason at all. It was about creating fear, about making people keep their heads down and their mouths shut. But Representative Jared Golden from Maine, he's a Democrat, but he gets it. He understands that working people don't care about your party label when they're sitting around the kitchen table trying to figure out how to pay the bills. They care about being treated fairly. They care about having a voice at work. They care about job security. Golden started this whole thing, this discharge petition. He knew it was a long shot. He knew the odds were stacked against him like a rigged card game. But he also knew that if he could just get this vote to the floor, if he could just get people to look at the facts instead of the party labels, common sense would win out. And he was right. But it took Brian Fitzpatrick, that Republican from Pennsylvania, crossing the aisle to make it happen. That took guts, real guts, the kind of guts you don't see much in Washington these days. He could have played it safe, stayed quiet, gone along with the program like a good little soldier. Instead, he stood up. He said, you know what? I represent the people in my district, not the guy in the White House having a meltdown every time someone disagrees with him. That's what real leadership looks like. That's what courage looks like in the modern world. But the reaction from the hardcore supporters, the ones who think loyalty means never question anything, never thinking for yourself, it's been ugly, really ugly. They're calling for these 20 to be kicked out of the party. They're talking about primary challenges, about making examples out of anyone who dares to think independently. They want to turn the Republican Party into some kind of cult where you're not allowed to have your own opinions. You know what that reminds me of? The kind of stuff I grew up seeing in the neighborhood. The tough guys who demanded respect but never earned it. The bullies who thought fear was the same as leadership, who thought if you scared people enough, they'd follow you anywhere. But here's the thing about bullies. They're usually cowards underneath. And when people stop being afraid of them, when they realize the bully is all talk, that's when everything changes. That's when the bully becomes just another guy making noise. The thing is, Americans don't like bullies. We never have. It goes against everything we believe in. The more this administration attacks these 20 members, the more they show the country who they really are. They're showing that they're out of touch with reality. They're showing that they care more about control than they care about people. They're showing that they'd rather have blind obedience than honest service. And let's talk about Speaker Johnson for a minute, because this guy, he's the one who really got embarrassed today. His whole job is to keep his people in line, to count the votes and deliver them when it matters. Today he couldn't deliver a pizza, let alone the votes he needed. He watched as 20 members of his own party walked right past him to sign that petition. That's got to hurt. That's got to make you question everything you thought you knew about leadership. You see, Johnson got caught in the middle of something bigger than himself. He's so afraid of the far right, so afraid of making the president angry, so terrified of getting angry tweets sent his way, that he forgot about everyone else. He forgot about the people in the middle who just want government to work. He forgot about the moderates who sent him to Washington to solve problems, not create them. And when you forget about the middle, when you only listen to the loudest voices, you lose the middle. When you lose the middle, you're done. But here's what really gets me fired up about all this. What makes me think maybe there's still hope for this country. The workers, the federal employees who were scared they were going to lose their rights, who were going to bed every night wondering if their years of service meant anything. They're celebrating tonight, and they should be. They deserve to celebrate. For months, these people have been going to work every day with a knot in their stomach. They've been wondering if they still mattered, if their voices would ever be heard again. They felt powerless, like the whole system was rigged against them. But today, the system worked. Democracy worked. And it worked because regular people refused to give up hope, refused to accept that things couldn't change. That's what this is really about. Not the politics, not the games, not the Twitter fights, or the cable news shouting matches. It's about dignity. It's about respect. It's about the fundamental idea that if you work hard and serve your country, you deserve to be treated fairly. You deserve job security. You shouldn't have to worry that some politician's bad mood is going to blow your career away. The president, he thought he could just wave his hand like some kind of king and make it all happen. Executive orders, shortcuts, bypassing Congress like they don't even exist. Well, today Congress reminded him that we have three branches of government for a reason. Nobody gets to be king in America. Nobody. That's what we fought a revolution to get away from.
So you understand that the decisions by figures like Robert De Niro to openly reject Donald Trump, along with widely discussed deflection of establishment Republicans from Trump's political orbit, these shows a broader process of disillusionment rather than betrayal. Many early supporters across ideological, cultural, and class lines initially viewed Trump as a disruptive outsider who could challenge entrenched elites, renegotiate unfair systems, or tell the uncomfortable truth, quotes and quotes. For some, this support was something which was ingrained in frustration with political stagnation rather than agreement with Trump's deeper worldview. Over time, however, the gap between disruption and governance became increasingly difficult to ignore. Now, in the case of De Niro's, his opposition crystallized as Trump behavior moved beyond unconventional rhetoric into sustained contempt for democratic norms. What began for the blunt honesty or anti-establishment bravado evolved into habitual attacks on the press, the judiciary, the electoral process, and political opponents. For individuals who value institutional stability, even while criticizing its flaws, this pattern signaled not reform but erosion. The realization was that Trump's politics did not aim to improve institutions, but to delegitimize any structure that constrained his personal authority. Now, among Republicans, the abandonment of Trump reflects a collision between party identity and personal loyalty. Traditional Republican ideology emphasizes constitutional order, predictable governance, and global credibility. Even when pursuing conservative policy goals, Trump's repeated challenges to election outcomes, disregard for rule-based norms, and willing to personalize the state placed many party elites in an attainable position. Supporting Trump increasingly required defending actions that contradicted principles they had publicly upheld for decades, creating internal fracture that could no longer be contained. Another reason that's why we are seeing people turning against Trump is the cumulative effect of inconsistency and chaos. While some supporters tolerated early instability of the cost of disruption, years of erratic decision-making, staff turnover, and public feuds revealed a pattern rather than an adjustment period. Governance by impulse undermined confidence among business leaders, military officials, diplomats, and legislators who depended on predictability. What initially appeared as strength came to be understood as volatility, with the real consequences for national credibility and policy coherence. There is also a moral dimension to shift. Trump rhetoric on race, protest, immigration, and dissent repeatedly tested the boundaries of acceptable public discourse. For individuals who once believed that such language was exaggerated by media or would moderate over time, they sustained evidence suggested otherwise. The normalization of insult, dehumanization, and political cruelty forced many former supporters to confront whether silence or continued support made them complicit in arms they claimed not to endorse. The abandonment of Trump by some Republicans also shows strategic calculations. As legal challenges, electoral losses, and declining coalition strengths accumulated, Trump came to be seen less as a kingmaker and more as a liability. Politics is ultimately forward-looking, and many actors began asserting whether alignment with Trump jeopardized their own futures. The pragmatic distancing does not always signal moral awakening, but it does indicate recognition that Trump's influence was no longer synonymous with success. For public figures like people like De Niro, the shift is also tied to the responsibility of visibility. Celebrity who once upped Trump might govern responsibly found themselves watching the consequence play out in real time. Polarization, institutional distrust, and social fragmentation. Speaking out became less about personal dislike and more about warning audiences against normalizing behavior they viewed as corrosive. Their reversal highlights how first-hand observations can dismantle awful assumptions. Importantly, many Black Americans and other marginalized groups argue that this turning point came late. From their perspective, Trump's trajectory was visible from the beginning, which was rooted in long-standing racialized and authoritarian patterns in American politics. The broader backlash then is not simply about Trump changing, but about others finally experiencing enough disruption to validate earlier warnings. This timing gap reveals whose concerns are taken seriously and when it should be taken seriously. The metaphor here of a sinking ship captures more than declining popularity. It shows a collapse of a narrative. Trump was once framed as a deal maker, a strong leader, or a necessary shock to the system. As those narratives failed under scrutiny, supporters were left without a coherent justification for continued allegiance. When belief collapses, understand that exit becomes inevitable, whether publicly or quietly. So please, brothers and sisters, let me know what you think and feel about this video. I'm your host and presenter, H Stories. But until then, let me see you in my next video. Peace, love, and harmony. Salute.